If you are reading these lines hundreds of years later, you probably think of my time as an epic of knights and towering cathedrals. Well, allow me to disappoint you. My time smelled not of incense, but of unwashed bodies, rotten straw, and a fierce sharper than any knife. My name was Lucas Vogel. I was a doctor in a world where prayer was considered a more reliable cure for the plague than clean water, and the study of anatomy was a direct ticket to hell. My life changed in Padua. In Italy, the sun shone differently. It seemed to penetrate through the skull and illuminate the brain. There, in the basements of the university, we secretly dissected the bodies of criminals. You cannot imagine the feeling, to see for the first time how a human is built. No demons inside, no black bile from sins. Just muscles, nerves looking like silver threads, and the heart, an ordinary meat bag that pumps blood. Gods, I was young and thought that if I knew how the liver works, I could explain to people why they die. What a naive, vulgar mistake. When I returned to my hometown, I brought with me a bag of tools and a head full of Erasmus's ideas. My father, also a doctor who treated people with leeches and spells all his life, looked at my Italian books as if they were written in Satan's blood. "Hide this, son," he whispered. "Now is not the time for reason. Now is the time for the hammer." And the hammer was already thundering. Malleus Maleficarum, the book of two mad monks, became more popular than the Bible. People started seeing witches in every sour milk and in every child who died in the cradle. I opened my practice on the outskirts of the city. My patients were peasants whose bodies were worn out by labor, and burghers who ate away their fear with fat goose. I saw injustice that made me want to howl at the moon. Lords dying of gout in golden beds, and the poor coughing up their lungs in damp cellars. And above all this, the church which said, "Suffer, for God wills it so." You know, I often thought, if God truly wants a child to die of dysentery and agony, then he is the greatest sadist imaginable. But I kept these thoughts to myself. In our town, for such words, one could easily meet the Iron Maiden. My daily life was a mixture of cynicism and despair. I would visit a sick woman, give her poppy decoction to dull the pain a little, and next to her stood a priest, screaming that she must repent for the sins of her ancestors. I wanted to scream, "She needs a clean shirt and some broth, not your censer, you fool." But I only nodded and took my 2 silver coins for the visit. Money smelled of sickness, but allowed me to buy expensive oils and wine. By 35, I had become as dry and hard as a piece of old leather. I stopped believing in miracles. Beauty to me was just symmetry of the face, and love, a flash of blood in the veins that passes quickly. I had seen too many dissected bodies to look for a soul in them. I was sure I would live my life patching up wounds of drunken soldiers and closing the eyes of old merchants until I myself turned to dust. The world around me was going mad. In a neighboring town, they burned 3 women in 1 week. The reason? One was too silent, the second talked to a cat, and the third was too beautiful for her poverty. Do you understand this absurdity? If you are ugly, you are a witch because the devil disfigured you. If you are beautiful, you are a witch because the devil gave you a mask to seduce the righteous. Women of that time had no escape. To be a woman meant to be guilty by fact of birth. I remember that rainy evening in October. I sat in my apothecary, grinding valerian roots. Candlelight danced on jars with preserved freaks and bundles of dried herbs. There was a knock at the door. Not confident, not like when they bring money, but quiet and desperate. I opened. On the threshold stood a man, an old weaver whose face was gray with fear. "Doctor," he wheezed, "I beg you help. My daughter, they say she is sick with sin, but she is just dying." I wanted to refuse. There was a curfew, and helping those on whom the shadow of suspicion had already fallen was dangerous for business. But the old man held out a golden coin, probably the last thing his family had. Greed and curiosity overcame caution. I took my bag and followed him through dark, stinking alleys where rats felt more like masters than people. We came to a dilapidated hut by the river. The air there smelled of rotten water and dampness. In the corner, on a pile of rags, lay she, Elsa. I had seen thousands of faces, but when I lowered the lantern over her, I almost dropped it. Her beauty was indecent for this filth. She looked like an angel thrown into a sewer. White skin glowing in the darkness, hair the color of dark honey, and eyes. Even in fever they were huge and deep like lakes. She breathed heavily, with a rattle. Pneumonia, a death sentence in our world. But the fear in her father's eyes was not because of the sickness. "Doctor," he whispered. Neighbors saw a black bird flying to her. They say she bewitched the burgomaster's son. He walks under her windows and cries. If they find out she got sick, they will say it is God punishing her for witchcraft. I looked at this girl. Her beauty truly was a challenge. She was too bright for the gray mess of Nuremberg. In a society ruled by grayness, any bright color is considered poisonous. I touched her forehead. It was burning. In that moment, for the first time in many years, I felt not medical interest, but wild, primal anger. Not at the sickness, but at this damned world, ready to burn such perfection just because it cannot comprehend it. I stayed with her until morning. I gave her wine with spices. I wiped her body with vinegar. I listened to her delirium. She whispered not of demons, but of flowers in a meadow and a mother who had died. She was a simple human who was unlucky enough to be born perfect in an age of freaks. The year 1408 became the beginning of my fall, or my rise. I am still not sure. I was Dr. Lucas, a cynic and a skeptic. But that night, in that stench and poverty, I signed my contract not with the devil, but with love that smelled of death. I knew, if I save her from sickness, I doom her to the stake. And yet, I began to treat, because reason said run. But the heart I considered only a muscular bag, for the first time beat in a rhythm that defied all anatomy. Fate set its nets. We were in the very center of the Inquisition's web. Ahead lay a path where every smile cost a life, and every kiss was a sin against the whole kingdom. I was ready for battle. I did not know that my main enemy would not be the Inquisitor, but beauty, which blinds reason stronger than any sun. Elsa recovered slowly, like spring breaking through a thick layer of dirty ice. I came to her every evening, hiding in the shadows of alleys like a thief stealing not gold, but time. My visits were a dangerous game. In Nuremberg of that time, a doctor who visited a poor girl too often risked either his reputation or his head. But I did not care. Every time I opened the door of their crooked hut, and the smell of wet straw mixed with the scent of vinegar and my herbs, I felt my own life, previously gray and predictable, filling with bright colors. I remember that evening when she was first able to sit up on her poor bed by herself. The candle on the table crackled, releasing a stream of black smoke, and outside the window, rain drummed on the tiles like thousands of little demons trying to get inside. Elsa looked at me, and in her eyes there was no longer the fog of fever. There was reason, sharp, curious, and unintimidated. She started asking me about my medicines, about Italy, about the stars. Do you understand what shock this was for me? In a world where women were taught only to pray and remain silent, she wanted to know why blood flows through veins and why the moon changes its shape. Her beauty, which at first seemed to me only anatomical perfection, now became my curse. She was not just beautiful. She was alive in a society that adored death. Every time I touched her wrist to check the pulse, I felt not just a heartbeat, but an electric shock running through my body from fingertips to spine. My medical treatises could not explain this. In Padua, we were taught that love is a disease of the brain caused by an excess of burning spirit in the blood. If so, then I was hopelessly sick. We talked for hours. She told me about her childhood, about a mother who taught her to see beauty in simple stones and flowers. She told me how hard it is to be a woman whom everyone looks at with either lust or hatred. Her beauty was not a gift for her, but a heavy cross. Women in the city turned away when she passed by, whispering spells against the evil eye, and men looked at her as if they wanted to devour her alive, especially Ulrich, the burgomaster's son. This arrogant bastard with the face of a fed boar got it into his head that Elsa must belong to him. He sent her gifts which she returned, and every rejected gesture turned into a new drop of poison in his soul. In our world, the injured pride of a noble often became a reason for accusations of witchcraft. I began taking her to my apothecary under the cover of night. It was the height of madness. My apothecary was my fortress, filled with jars of strange preparations, dried bats, and instruments gleaming with copper. There, amidst the scent of myrrh and sulphur, we found our paradise. I taught her to read Latin, showed her my anatomical drawings. She touched the parchment with her long, graceful fingers, and I saw in her eyes that same fire of knowledge that once consumed me in Italy. Our love was vulgar in its simplicity and sublime in its risk. We did not exchange high words about chivalry. We simply made love on an old leather couch amidst dried herbs, and the scent of mint and valerian soaked into our skin. It was love in the shadow of the gallows. Every creak of the stairs, every shout of the night watchman made us freeze in each other's arms. I felt every line of her body, every curve of her muscles, and I understood that no church, no inquisitor has the right to call this a sin. The sin was the darkness outside, but here, in the light of a single candle, truth reigned. But Nuremberg did not sleep. The city breathed suspicion. The stench of sewers mixed with the stench of gossip. Malleus Maleficarum became the handbook of every fanatic. Brother Heinrich, an inquisitor with eyes as cold as a reptile, arrived in the city. His appearance was like a black raven on a rooftop. Everyone knew death would follow soon. He began preaching in the square, telling how the devil takes the form of a beautiful woman to drag the righteous into hell. The crowd listened with open mouths, absorbing every word like a sponge absorbs dirty water. I saw the noose tightening. My neighbors began looking at me suspiciously. Why does Dr. Vogel burn lights so often at night? Why does he smell of strange scents? Why did he stop going to confession? I became an outcast in my own city, but I didn't care. I was obsessed with Elsa. I wanted to hide her from the whole world, put her in a glass jar like a rare butterfly, so that no one could touch her with their dirty thoughts. One day, as we sat in the apothecary, Elsa looked at me with such sadness that it took my breath away. "Lucas," she said, and her voice was like the rustle of autumn leaves, "they will not let us be happy. This world is intolerant of what it cannot understand. My beauty is my death warrant, and your reason is your scaffold." I kissed her hands, smelling of sage. "We will escape, Elsa, to Padua, to Florence, to where people read books, not burn them." It was a beautiful dream, but reality was crueler than any medical instrument. Ulrich, the burgomaster's son, did not intend to back down. He followed me. He saw Elsa entering my apothecary. His lustful desire turned into religious fanaticism, the classic path of a loser. If he could not possess her body, he wanted to see it burn. It gave him a sense of power, a sense of justice. The next day, a sign appeared on my door, a red cross smeared with soot. A warning, but I was too overconfident. I thought my status as a doctor, my connections with influential merchants would protect us. What an illusion. In the face of religious hysteria, any status crumbles to dust. People I had treated for years now crossed to the other side of the street upon seeing me. Mothers covered their children's eyes as if I were the devil himself. The atmosphere in the city became unbearable. It smelled of a storm, though the sky was clear. They began gathering firewood in the square. It was not for heating. Everyone understood what these logs were for. Brother Heinrich began summoning people for interrogation. Every denunciation, every word of an offended neighbor became evidence. She looked at my cow, and the cow stopped giving milk. He read a book with signs looking like snakes. Ignorance celebrated its triumph. We planned the escape for St. John's night. I gathered gold, prepared horses, with a trusted man on the outskirts. We were to go through the forest, to the very border. I saw this as our only chance. Elsa was scared, but she trusted me. She became my right hand, helping me gather the most valuable medicines. On that last night before the disaster, we were especially careless. We did not extinguish the light. We talked about our future in Italy, about houses of white marble and vineyards. I painted pictures of life where there is no fear, where beauty is a blessing, not a curse. We made love as if trying to saturate ourselves in advance with the whole life we would not have. Her body beneath me was hot and trembling, like a string about to snap. But at dawn, there was no knock at my door. They smashed it in. The heavy boots of soldiers stomped on the wooden floor. The smell of iron, cheap sweat, and torches burst into my sterile apothecary. I only managed to throw a cloak over Elsa before we were surrounded. In front stood Ulrich, his face glowing with triumph, and next to him, Brother Heinrich, holding a crucifix as if it were a dagger. Lucas Vogel. The Inquisitor's voice was cold as ice at the bottom of a well. You are accused of harboring a witch and defiling a Christian soul with your devilish sciences. And this creature will stand before God's judgment. I lunged at them, but a blow from a heavy gauntlet to my face knocked me back. The taste of blood in my mouth was salty and bitter. I saw them grab Elsa. She did not scream. She simply looked at me, and in her gaze there was so much pain and so much love that my heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. They dragged her through the street, and people she had never seen came out of their houses to spit on her. Which, devil's whore, the beauty that once admired now evoked in them only a lust for destruction. It was the most terrible injustice I had ever seen. A whole crowd of people united in hatred for one fragile girl whose only fault was that she was perfect. I was thrown into a dungeon, but not as a prisoner, but as one who must wait for his sentence. I sat in a damp cell, listening to rats scratching in the corner, and I realized that my reason, my education, my gold, all of it was worth nothing. 3,800 words of our love were trampled by the dirty boots of fanatics in 1 minute. The year 1498 was preparing to light its main bonfire. I was Lucas, the doctor who could not cure the world of madness. Ahead lay a night of torture and a day of execution. But I knew, if I do not save her, my life will end before the fire touches my skin. Because without her, I will again become just an anatomical exhibit, a body without a soul, simply waiting for dissection. Darkness in the dungeons of Nuremberg has its own special taste. It is not just the absence of light. It is a thick cocktail of the smell of wet salt, old manure, and rusty iron that eats into the lungs. For the first 3 days of my imprisonment, I was in a state that could hardly be called life. It was a slow dissolution of the mind in cold stone. I was not tortured. The Inquisition left that pleasure for later, believing that my own realization of ruin would be worse than the rack. Brother Heinrich, that holy executioner, knew his business. He understood that for a man of science, the greatest torture is to see how idiocy defeats logic. Do you know what injustice is, when your knowledge becomes your enemy? I sat on dirty straw and imagined in detail what they were doing to Elsa in the neighboring tower. My anatomical memory painted every bone, every nerve, every muscle of her perfect body, and I knew exactly how iron would tear apart this perfection. It was my personal hell. I banged my head against a stone, trying to knock these images out of my brain, but they only became brighter. Ulrich, the burgomaster's son, came to my bars. He did not speak, He simply stood there in his velvet doublet, chewing a ripe apple, letting the juice run down his chin. In this gesture, there was so much vulgar triumph that I felt my heart turning into a lump of pure hatred. And then the trials began. They were not called torture, no. The Church loved beautiful words for its vile deeds. First came the trial by needle. Brother Heinrich saw it on Elsa's body, the mark of the devil, a place where she feels no pain. I heard her screams through 3 layers of stone. These screams were inhuman. Can you imagine what it is like to hear the voice of the woman you love as she is pierced by long steel needles centimeter by centimeter? They were looking for something that does not exist, and every drop of her blood was proof of their madness. My science screamed inside me. There are no marks, only capillaries and pain receptors. But in the year 1498, science was a mute slave of religious psychosis. Then came the trial by water. She was tied up and thrown into the icy Piegnitz. If she floats, it means water, the symbol of baptism, rejects her as a witch. If she drowns, it means she is innocent. Do you understand this absurd choice between the gallows and drowning? She did not float. She was pulled out HFDD, with lungs full of dirty water, but Brother Heinrich said it was only a trick of the devil wanting to save his bride. The injustice was so thick it could be cut with a surgical knife. On the 7th day, I was summoned for a conversation. I was brought into a hall smelling of wax and death. On the table lay the Malleus Maleficarum, and next to it, instruments whose sight took my breath away. Brother Heinrich looked at me with his cold eyes and said that if I did not confess to an alliance with the witch, he would order Elsa's tongue cut out, so she could no longer whisper spells. It was a moment of complete despair. I fell to my knees, not before God, but before that cruel force that now ruled my world. I was ready to confess to anything. I was ready to say that I myself am the son of Satan, just so they would stop this madness. But in the moment when I opened my mouth to destroy myself, I saw a shadow in the window. It was Hans, my assistant, who by some miracle bribed the guard and gave me a signal. A brief flash of sun on the blade of a small scalpel. Hope returned not as a religious miracle, but as a cold, calculated idea. I remembered my experiments in Padua. I remembered alkaloids, the mixture of mandragora, henbane, and opium we used to put a person into a state almost indistinguishable from death. Breathing becomes so weak it cannot be felt even by a mirror. The heart beats once a minute, and the skin becomes cold as ice. To the ignorant, a corpse. To a doctor, merely a pause. A plan was born, so crazy and so dangerous that it made my blood run cold. I had to convince the Inquisition that Elsa had already died from God's punishment. I began to speak, not a confession, but a lie wrapped in medical terms. I told Heinrich I saw signs of the black death of the soul on her body, and that I could prepare a potion that would force the devil out of her, but at the cost of her earthly life. If God wants her soul, he will take it himself, I said, trying to keep my voice from trembling. Give me 1 hour in her cell so I can perform the ritual of purification with my oils. Heinrich hesitated. His pride wanted a public bonfire, but his fear of the devilish contagion I so skillfully described proved stronger. He allowed it. When I entered Elsa's cell, I almost fainted. She lay on the wet floor, pale as a sheet, her once beautiful hair matted and dirty. But when she opened her eyes, I saw there the same Elsa. She did not give up. She did not utter a single word against me, even under torture. This was higher than any chivalry. I pressed her to me, feeling every one of her wounds. Elsa, I whispered right into her ear, now you will sleep. It will be like death, but you must trust me. I will pull you out of the grave. I poured into her mouth the mixture Hans had passed to me through the jailer for all my gold reserves. It was a risk of 1 in a million. Too much mandragora, and the heart stops forever. Too little, and she wakes up under the executioner's knife. I held her in my arms, counting the pulse. 1, 2, 3. The world around froze. Her body relaxed, breathing disappeared. She became cold. When Brother Heinrich entered the cell, he saw only a body. He touched her neck, crossed himself, and recoiled. "The devil took his own," he hissed with disgust. "Take out this filth, and throw it into the plague pit on the edge of the city." Without prayer, without a cross. I was released because my mission as a doctor was completed. I walked out of the tower, staggering like a drunkard. The sun blinded me. Around me the city bustled. People laughed, traded, argued over the price of beer, not even suspecting that behind these walls the greatest drama of the century had just taken place. The injustice was that they considered this finale just. I had only 2 hours before they started filling the pit with lime. Hans waited for me by a hay wagon. My heart beat so hard I feared it would break my ribs. This was our last chance. We had to steal what was already considered dead, to give it a second life. The year 1408 became the year of my death as a citizen of Nuremberg. I was no longer Lucas Vogel. I was a shadow creeping among corpses, holding a vial of antidote and a hope that smelled of damp earth. Ahead lay a path through the cemetery, through fear, and through the night, where every owl seemed a spy of the Inquisition. But in my memory, her last look still lived. And I knew, if she does not wake up, I myself will lie in that pit next to her. For the world without her is just a great anatomical operating room, where there is nothing but cold stone and emptiness. Hope returned, but it was sharp as a blade, and I already felt it cutting my soul. The night after Elsa's death was the darkest of my life. The world around us turned into a ghostly haze, where every sound seemed like the steps of a soldier, and every flash of a lantern, the beginning of a new bonfire. Hans and I made our way to the plague pit on the edge of the city, while the moon hid behind heavy clouds, as if God himself did not want to see what we were about to do. The smell of lime, mixed with the sweetish spirit of rot, hit my nostrils so hard that I pressed a handkerchief soaked in vinegar to my mouth to keep from fainting. We found her at the very bottom, among the bodies of poor souls the city had thrown out like garbage. She lay there, pale and cold, covered in white lime dust, like a marble statue fallen from a pedestal. My hands trembled as I dug through this terrible debris of human lives. I lifted her. She was light as an empty butterfly cocoon. Hans helped me place her on the cart, covering her with fresh hay. We left Nuremberg at dawn, and the creak of wheels on the cobblestones echoed in my skull like a funeral bell. The first 24 hours of our escape were a complete nightmare. I administered the antidote in a small hunting hut 10 miles from the city. I sat by her for hours, holding her hand and counting heartbeats that were barely there. 1, 2, 3. I prayed to all the doctors of the past, to all the forces of nature, to the very logic of the universe. And when the sun of the second day touched her eyelids, she shuddered. It was a short, painful breath, as if her soul was re-entering her body through a narrow crack. When she opened her eyes and recognized me, for the first time in my life, I cried, not as a doctor, but as a man who had just reclaimed his world from the void. We did not stop until we crossed the border of the Alps. We went south to Italy, leaving behind the gloomy Nuremberg, Brother Heinrich, and the smell of bonfires. In Italy, no one knew us. We changed our names. Now we were Antonio and Lucia, a pair of refugees from the north, seeking shelter in the warm embrace of Padua. My gold, which I managed to smuggle out, helped me open a small apothecary near the university. You will ask, what happened to our enemies? Oh, fate knows how to be witty in its cruelty. 5 years after our escape, I received a letter from Hans, who remained in Nuremberg. Ulrich, the burgomaster's son, the same lustful loser who doomed Elsa to torment, went mad. He saw her beauty everywhere. He saw her face in every mirror, and eventually, he jumped from the window of the town hall right onto the stones of the square where they once gathered wood for her fire. And Brother Heinrich, he continued his grim work until he became a victim of his own paranoia. He was accused of heresy by the same monks with whom he used to burn women. He died in a dungeon, alone and forgotten, never realizing that the greatest devil on this earth was he himself. Our life in Italy became our reward. I began teaching at the university again, but now I taught students not only the anatomy of the body, but the anatomy of compassion. Elsa, she became my chief assistant. Her beauty did not fade with years. It only became deeper, like good wine. She was no longer a witch. She was the respected wife of a scholar, a woman who knew the secrets of herbs better than any apothecary. We had 3 children, 2 daughters, as beautiful as their mother, and a son who inherited my curiosity about how the world works. I taught them that beauty is not a sin, and reason is not heresy. We lived simply, without golden luxury, but with such fullness of heart that I did not know in my young years. In the evenings, we sat in our garden under the grapevine, drank red wine, and watched the sunset. Sometimes I touched the scars on her hands, those same traces from the Inquisition's needles, and kissed them. These were our medals for victory over darkness. Now I am 72 years old. My hands are no longer so skillful with a scalpel, and my eyes see the world through the light mist of senile farsightedness. But I write this with a smile. I know that every minute of my life after Nuremberg was a gift. We lived together for 44 years, and not once did I regret my choice. Love is truly the only medicine capable of curing despair, and the only force that can turn death into the beginning of something beautiful. Do not fear the darkness of your time. Do not fear the fools holding torches. Seek your reason, protect your beauty, and remember, even if you are thrown into the darkest pit, the light of one sincere heart can pull you out. I, Lucas Vogel, the doctor who stole a life from the Inquisition, testify to this. I am closing my diary. The sun is already sitting behind the domes of Padua, and I hear Elsa's voice. She is calling me to dinner. This voice is all I need to know. I won. We won. And the history of our love now belongs to eternity, where there is no fire, but only the eternal light of reason and warmth.